right, here we go. Ladies, gentlemen, this is Law Enforcement and Me, and I am Carmen Jones, all the way from Baltimore, Maryland, doing this lovely podcast for you. Today is July 29th, 2025, and the day after some things went on in New York. This was supposed to have been posted yesterday, but yesterday was kind of crazy after I saw what went down in New York. New York, the mecca of the East Coast, basically. And apparently, someone decided to walk into an office building and take out a long gun and unalive some people, as well as a police officer. And my condolences to everyone who lost their life, to the police officer. And some things that we're going to talk about in this episode. Yes, I'm doing this by myself today. My friend Tim gave me so much insight on our last episode, and I'm gonna go into a few things on that. I am still looking for anybody that wants to come on this broadcast. Excuse me. Law enforcement, anybody that's not law enforcement, pseudo law enforcement, a security guard or something like that, a mailman, somebody that can come in and talk about things from different perspectives than what I have. Tim and I have been friends, I believe, about 15 years. I'm familiar with his story, and his story comes out slowly during these broadcasts. And even though he is not law enforcement, he is law enforcement adjacent. Yeah. Anyway, couple of things I want to talk about. The previous episode that I did with Tim, we talked about rights and those rights and responsibilities that we have doing life as we know it. And one of the things that I mentioned was something called that they have here in Maryland called a vagabond charge. Now, I usually say that Law Enforcement and Me is raw and unscripted, but I'm going to have a little bit of a script today with a few things that I'm going to go over. The first thing I'm going to talk about is what is a vagabond charge. Now, when I did this research, I remember word of mouth, per se, here in Maryland. The vagabond charge basically is if you get pulled over by the police and you do not have a way to identify yourself, meaning that you don't have a Maryland issued license, any license from any state, an identification card, a passport, anything that identifies you as who you are. Because you came out of the house without valid identification, the police can actually arrest you for that and charge you with a vagabond. In my mind, what I was thinking was it is illegal for you to walk out of your house without identification. And because of that, you can go before the judge and get fined for it and actually have that charge stay on your record. That's just how I saw things. But I decided to do a Google search, and it was pretty interesting, some of the things that I found out. So the basics of a vagabond charge, defined as a person without a fixed home. Didn't think that would ever come up. Not employed nor seeking legitimate work. That's pretty interesting. That person is defined that way as a vagabond. Loitering in public places without a clear purpose. Honestly, that's a whole lot of people. I think that's like anybody walking the street, anybody waiting for a bus, anybody waiting for a taxi cab and Uber. Loitering in public places without a clear purpose. That's the whole syntax of Las Vegas, New Orleans, those places. Because you're walking up and down the street and you're sightseeing and you really don't have a purpose. You're just sightseeing, or what I like to do, people watch. However, the other part of that, it says is seen as undesirable by law enforcement. Undesirable. I've been in many bars where people are just undesirable, but that doesn't make them a vagabond. I digress. Anyway, a vagabond charge was often used as a catch-all misdemeanor to arrest someone on vague suspicion, even if they had not committed a specific crime. It was often categorized alongside vagrancy, loitering, public intoxication, or panhandling. So I'm still trying to grasp a hold of what the whole vagabond thing is. So I'm still reading off of this script that I found on Google. How does it work for or used to work? The first one says discretionary arrest. Police could arrest individuals simply for appearing suspicious, being homeless, or loitering without explanation. Number two, no requirement of criminal act. The person did not have to actually commit a crime, just being in the wrong place or not having a job or ID could be enough. That was where my mindset was when I first heard the term vagabond. Now, the third rule, it talks about court appearance. The accused might be fined, jailed, or ordered to leave town, especially in the earlier decades. So a vagabond, in my mindset, I'm thinking about back in the old days, the 30s and 40s, where you got what we used to call the hobos that would jump on a train and go from place to place and town to town. A lot of times they were looking for work. A vagabond to me is that person that is jumping on a train, jumping on some sort of transportation to get to the next place so that they can get to work, so that they can get something to eat. And of course, in 2025 terminology, we don't have that type of hobo anymore that jumps the trains. But what we do have are people that are desolate, living in tent cities, unable to work. Sometimes they're on disability and their finances don't even allow them. People have to make a choice between food or shelter. God forbid that happens to anybody listening, but that's what a vagabond in my mind is. However, in my mind with that is that if you cannot identify yourself, if a police officer comes up to you, that's a criminal act because it seems like you're purposely not giving the police the information that they need. That's what to me a vagabond is. But in reading through this, I can kind of understand where that divide between police and the community can come from, because as someone out here who might not be able to give a police officer an actual physical copy of my driver's license, my identification with the state of Maryland, does that mean that I'm automatically a criminal because my only crime is that I cannot identify myself through a state license? That I'm trying to find the correct vocabulary word to define what's going on in my head. It's I can understand why. I can understand it twofold, because if I'm a police officer, and especially watching On Patrol Live with that real life thing that I always talk about, in if you don't have a way of identifying yourself, well, why can't you identify yourself? What are you hiding? But on the citizenship side of that, I can't identify myself because I'm having a hard time. I'm in a hardship right now. Excuse the silence, just trying to find my words. It's tougher than I actually thought. So, and going back to the script, the Google script that I have here, the legal challenges and civil rights impact. In the 1972 case, Papa Christou, Papachristou versus the city of Jacksonville, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a vagrancy ordinance, calling it unconstitutionally vague and giving police too much power. Unconstitutionally vague. For me, that makes a lot of sense, but I need somebody from law enforcement to help me understand how their perspective is on that. Going back, the civil rights movement exposed how such laws were often used to harass people of color, especially during segregation or protest activity. Okay, if we're talking about Jim Crow era prior to this 1972 Supreme Court ruling, I get where that came from. I get why they talked about that. Okay, cool. Now, excuse me. Now, homelessness advocates argue that modern versions still criminalize poverty. So a vagabond, if you think about it in the term of what I'm talking about in this segment, is you are a criminal because not only are you homeless, not only are you unable to find work, not only do you not have the way to identify yourself, but you are now listed as a criminal. That bridge that I'm trying to put together here so that we can come together through law enforcement and the community, there's a big divide right there when you talk about how homelessness can be criminalized. Vagabond, hobo is a criminal act. That's pretty scary. Are there similar laws nationwide? Of course there are. California has one, Florida has one, Texas has one, New York has one. New York used to have they had a law. It was anti-loitering through several parts, but a lot of those were repealed. I don't have the numbers on that. The quality of life or public nuisance laws regulate sitting, sleeping, or begging in public places. Okay, as a former Las Vegas resident, begging, walking up and down the strip, and you're just trying to enjoy yourself, and it's legal to have a cocktail in your hand as you're walking down the strip and you're looking at the water show at the Bellagio. But if you turn around and somebody's asking you for money, that's a nuisance law. And of course, those bike patrols that they have in Las Vegas, if that bike patrol officer catches you begging for money, they can take you to Clark County Detention Center on that quality of life nuisance law. It's a lot of catch-22s when it comes to this vagabond thing. I'm going to read like one more paragraph here, and then I'm going to move on to the next topic. So, why is this controversial? Number one, its discriminatory enforcement is often used against racial minorities, including LGBTQIA, sex workers, or unhoused people. We already talked about the homelessness. Poverty criminalization. Critics argue that these laws punish people for being poor or mentally ill. Now I know, Tim, I always got to bring you in. Poverty criminalization because someone is mentally ill. I know you can speak on that, and maybe the next time I bring you in, because you have that open invitation to come on Law Enforcement and Me, we can dig deeper into that. And then we have the modern policing debates, part of a larger discussion around decriminalizing homelessness and reforming police practices. But it also goes into governments. It also goes into voting. It also goes into the judges that we put on the bench. It goes into a lot of the laws that are placed on the books and on the voting ballots when we go into that booth and cast our vote. Law Enforcement and Me was not designed to be political, and I'm trying so hard not to make it political. But in this segment, I'm just trying to get a full understanding of a vagabond charge. Okay. So that being said, on this past weekend's episodes of On Patrol Live, I've been saying this. This is season 4, and I've been saying this, I know, since season 1. Pull over to the right. I thought that when you take your driver's test, when you do driver's education, they don't even teach driver's education in high school anymore. But when you took your driver's education class, when you went and took the actual written test, as well as going and having the actual driving test with the state trooper, if a emergency vehicle such as fire or ambulance, if you are being pulled over by a police officer, blue lights, red lights, if those lights are behind you, you move over to the right to get out of the way. I cannot for the life of me understand, as I watch On Patrol Live, how people don't adhere to that common driving law. And if that's changed, I need to know that. I've had a driver's license in Maryland. I've had a driver's license in Las Vegas. I've had a driver's license in Texas. All 3 of those places, the same thing occurred. If you see or hear emergency vehicles coming up behind you, you pull over to the right. You mean to tell me that there are now laws that just came on the books in certain places that's called a move over law? That, for me, is unfathomable. So, of course, me doing my research, because I'm trying to make this raw and unscripted. No, I got to read some stuff. So, Google, move over emergency vehicles in all 50 states, except Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. does not have a move over law. However, each and every state has, and I'm talking about Puerto Rico as well, has some sort of move over law requiring drivers to move over to one lane or, if unable, slow down when encountering stopped emergency vehicles. Oh, some states specify due care rather than a required lane change. Pennsylvania and South Dakota are those. Drivers' handbooks and manuals. Most state DMV manuals include guidance about yielding to emergency vehicles, pulling to the right, or changing lanes and stopping. For example, the Virginia Driver's Manual instructs drivers to yield, pull safely to the right, and stop until the emergency vehicle passes. Kentucky's driver's manual advises flashing your flashers or your hazard lights, pulling safely to the right, and stopping for police traffic stops specifically. During a traffic stop, acknowledge the officer, activate your hazard lights. Safely pull over to the right-hand side of the road as soon as possible. Stop and remain until directed otherwise by the officer. Every single video you see on YouTube, the Karenism videos, those are the ones that I just pull out the popcorn and get myself a glass of wine, because those are some of the most entertaining things I've ever seen in my life. What did you pull me over for? What did you pull me over for? Before the police officer can utter a single solitary word. And what I can't understand is if you just have to pull over to the right. I've seen watching On Patrol Live where they pull into the turning lane for a traffic stop. Can you imagine how dangerous that is? And I think over the weekend, one of the videos that they showed that came from, when I think it was Kansas, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody in the chat, where the police officer was in the middle of a traffic stop and nearly got taken out of here by two different cars from two different sides of this traffic stop that was in the middle lane, which is why they talked about the move over law. It's stupid to me that you would pull up. I mean, not only, even if you are a criminal, you want to live to see tomorrow. So why, during a traffic stop, would you stop in the center turn lane? Even if you are a criminal, why would you do that? If you want to live to see tomorrow, to commit your next crime, why would you do that? Well, I mean, Tom Rizzo says criminals aren't always the smartest. So, okay, here we go. So, researching my shows here of late have been just really interesting to me. So we did the vagabond charge. We did the pullover law. I'm still trying to understand On Patrol Live, those camera guys go through a lot. And I think I heard Dan Abrams say one day that they do, one episode I should say, that they do have some sort of training that those cameramen go through. Did we not see in Knox County, our favorite county, so far for the past at least 6 weeks, Knox County in Tennessee, they went through a swamp looking for a suspect. We'll find out this week if they found that suspect, because I think that was part of a big, broad investigation that happened on Saturday's show. And speaking of Saturday's show in Knox County, man, we got to pray for Knox County. Wow. So what was it? 6 weeks ago, we had Deputy Swanger get pretty much assaulted while investigating in the woods. And then, of course, this past Saturday, we had another officer doing an investigation again in the woods with the canine. Now, let's talk about dispatch real quick, because this particular scenario talks about the dispatcher. So the dispatcher, not the 911 operator, but the dispatcher who is, telling the police officers what to do, what their call is, and how to, tactically what to do, what they should be doing on the call. Now, I'm nowhere near in physical shape to ever talk about tactical things. I haven't been in a very long time, and I am an Air Force veteran. But once I got out of the military and I didn't have to do PT each and every day, I went on a break, and I've been on that break ever since. Anyway, but in watching this, and here they are. They're combing in the dark, in the blackness of night in Tennessee, this area where a vehicle was ditched, and they're looking for a suspect. So of course they pull out the canine. But the dispatch, who knows that they're in this area, somebody did not communicate with the railroad services, and so these guys are on the tracks, and they gotta run to get off the tracks and get out of the way because there's this train coming. Somehow, somewhere in all of that darkness, somebody didn't communicate correctly, and the canine attacked a fellow officer. That was scary because when we got a chance to see what happened after the train went by and see exactly what went down, I'm sitting up there thinking that, um, one of the branches he couldn't see maybe scraped him across his cheek. No, this officer was actually attacked by the dog. Dogs are not trained to see uniform. They're trained by sense of smell and I believe by hearing. And I need somebody to chime in on the chat to let me know if I'm wrong, because I probably am. But how scary is that you're trying to look for a suspect. Now all of a sudden you gotta totally just focus on yourself. And as the panel said on the episode of On Patrol Live, you go from investigation to now being EMT. So a cop's brain is pretty much jumbled at this point. And in my mind, the first thing I thought about was, oh no, not another Deputy Swanger. Because all you could see is blood just gushing from his cheek. And I'm looking at it, what does Tim call me doing? Monday morning quarterback, and I sure enough am. I'm looking at this. I'm like, you guys got to put pressure on that bleed. Where's the dog? You got to get the dog out of there. I'm just talking to the television. Television is not talking back to me. It's just showing me what they're filming. And I'm hitting the panic mode because I'm like, not another officer down in the woods. Not another officer down in the woods. And I'm talking to Tim through text, and he's saying, oh my God, not again. And then he reminded me of the time that he was on his job because he worked with the criminally mentally ill. I'm sorry, Tim. I'm sorry, Tim. And please, I know you talked about it on the show, Tim. So I'm sorry if I'm giving too much information about you to my listeners, but I just want them to understand. Guys, I've known Tim for about 15 years. I know his wife. I know his kids. So when he got hurt on the job, working with these criminally, I don't want to say insane, but these criminally mentally ill patients that he had, and his wife got that call. I cannot imagine what she went through. In talking about Deputy Swanger, she's actually his fiance. His fiance is actually watching On Patrol Live just like we were. And she's watching as her fiance gets attacked and there's nothing that she can do. So her blood pressure went through the roof and she probably had the biggest panic attack of her life. When we talk about what happened in New York yesterday and the officer that was killed, I cannot imagine what the family went through when they got that call. So a lot of times, if you're new to watching On Patrol Live, you'll see if it's a volatile situation, the camera crew will back away or they'll go to another segment. Because how would you feel if you were Deputy Swanger's fiance and you saw him come out of the woods with blood dripping down from his skull? God forbid if Tim had cameras around and his wife happened to be watching him while he was working and she's not knowing what the heck is going on. Can you imagine what she went through? If you were in New York yesterday and you saw somebody just walking up and down the street in Manhattan with a long gun going into that building, and you heard that guy never came out because he got killed, can you imagine what his family went through had they watched it? I don't know if they watched it, but can you imagine? All of that being said, I mean, I've talked about a lot of subjects in this segment here. And you guys know, if you're a regular listener, you guys know I ramble. I can't help it. My brain is always on. I have law enforcement in me. That's one of my projects. I have a writing project that I do. I have a vocal project that I do. I do plays. And then of course I work a full time job, and then I work at one of the sports venues. My brain is kind of on overdrive all the time, even when I'm asleep. So I apologize if I go all over the place. But I just need you guys to connect with me on this. What have we talked about so far in this episode? We talked about how certain charges that we think are innocent can actually become criminal where they don't have to be. We've talked about the laws, the basic laws of driving, to where you're not doing a criminal act while driving. We've talked about things that we see that the police officers do and how they interact and what they do to get through certain things just from what they do on their regular day-to-day job. We've learned about canine. You know, that whole canine patrol. That's why they have a whole different training than what the regular police officer does. They'll pass the academy, but now they got to pass a whole different academy for canine training, and they got to get to know a dog, and a dog's got to get to know them. I know I rambled. Sorry. Sorry. So, you know, in terms of the last topic I talked about, when it comes to police officers, and when they leave their home and their family may be home safe, but you got to make sure that that police officer gets home safe. And so when I talk about how my brain is jumbled, a police officer's brain is probably jumbled 100 times more than mine would ever be, because I cannot imagine coming from a homicide investigation, and then you get released because now it goes to the detectives, and then 10 minutes later you can pull somebody over because they got a tail light out, but they didn't pull over to the right. They pulled up into the turning lane. And now you got to turn off the homicide, turn on the traffic stop, and make sure that they don't bleed into each other. That's pretty deep. Um so I mean, I'm gonna wrap things up with talking about my favorite, which is, of course, of course, it's always going to be On Patrol Live. I always go back to On Patrol Live because, as I've stated, On Patrol Live is me looking at cops in real time, me looking at their interactions with the community in real time. I need to know what they're thinking. I get a better understanding of how they react to situations. I get a better understanding of what it is that they go through during the investigation. And I'm to the point now where I'm like, okay, I need to look up this situation from Richland County where they went before the judge, because I want to know what happened to that person. Um, so I always talk about it, but I always have to do the disclaimer. I do not work for On Patrol Live. I do not work for a Reels channel. I do not work for Dan Abrams. Unfortunately, I do not work for Rizzo. I do not work for Sticks. I don't work for Curtis Wilson. I don't work for any of the departments. I am Carmen Jones, all the way in Baltimore. Yes, I was named after a movie. Go watch the movie. We'll talk about that another time. But the last thing I'm gonna leave you with is like the best quote for me from the whole weekend show. Um, got through everything, and bravo to those guys, bravo to everybody. But I had a quote from Saturday's show. You know how when you're watching On Patrol Live and they see the camera and they don't realize that you're outside. So when you're outside, there's really not that much of a sense of privacy when you're outside. Even when you go to the supermarket, there is that implied consent when you go to Walmart, because there are cameras everywhere. But because you walk in there and you decide to shop, guess what? You're on camera. So you can't tell Walmart, I don't want to be on camera. If you're outside, you're outside. Cops have cameras, dash cams, drones, On Patrol Live. And of course, because On Patrol Live's cameras are different than the drones and the police body cameras, people want to say, oh, I don't want to be on camera. But my favorite quote of the weekend is, oh, that's okay. You don't have to want to be on camera. That was such a great line. Anyway, I'm going to go. I've rambled on enough. I hope I've given you guys some insight. I hope that on the next set of topics, jump in, ask me questions. I love talking to you guys. Put a microphone in front of me and I'm going to ramble. That's me. So let's get together. Let's talk about some things. Interact with me. I'll be sending out some invitations to a few of you listeners in the next few days. Hopefully, my next episode, we can talk about what's going on. And that being said, this, of course, my name is Carmen Jones, Law Enforcement and Me. Tonight was raw, but semi unscripted. And I want to thank you guys so much for listening. Take care of each other. Be kind. God bless you.